Good morning, everyone. I am here in beautiful Northland, New Zealand, a little bit more tropical than where I was last week. And it's tea time. So, what are we going to talk about today? I think the thing that is on my mind the most right now is the idea of pattern recognition. In the clinic last week, 2 weeks ago actually now, I've had a bit of a break between clinics, so I've done a lot of thinking. I was really interested in how some horses recognize patterns really quickly, and some horses need to see a pattern a lot of times before they recognize a pattern. This is true of humans also. Some of us need to see a pattern a lot of times before we see it's a pattern. And some of us just need to see it twice to recognize this is a thing that will happen again. Then we have to decide, do we like this pattern? Do we want to perpetuate it? In which case, we want to organize our rests around it. We want to make sure that memories get really strong about that pattern. We want to reinforce it in the way that we treat the pattern. With horses, that's going to be the same issue. You are going to have your faster learners and your slower learners. And of course, there's no absolute on this. This is going to be on a spectrum. But on a spectrum, some of your horses are going to learn patterns very, very quickly. And some of your horses are going to learn patterns in a very slow way. What I found is there's some pros and cons to both sides of the spectrum, which doesn't necessarily mean you want the middle of the spectrum. It just means that different people and different horses will like different things. For example, Myrna, my mare from the first movie, she was a very, very fast learner on that spectrum. She would see a pattern twice and know what the pattern was and know if she wanted to reinforce it or not. And Myrna was a great teacher because of how quickly things moved. But she was also sort of a difficult partner in some ways because she learned bad things as fast as she learned good things. And a few of you may have a horse like that. The ones that learn really quickly and then they shape life to be what they want it to be, which is not always what the human wants it to be. So if you have a fast learner, you hope that you are also a fast learner and you can see the patterns as quickly as your horse can see the patterns. That's not always true. Sometimes for us humans, we need a little bit more repetition. And we can see this thing leads to that thing, leads to that thing. And then we decide if we want to participate in that pattern happening over and over and over and becoming habit, or if maybe we want to change something about that pattern. So one thing that I see come up a lot, not in my teaching because I teach in freedom, but around my teaching because I'm in a lot of horse facilities, is this issue of pulling on a rope. So a lot of people don't want to pull on their halter rope. They feel like it's rude. They feel like it's not a relationship they want to have with their horse to pull on their rope. And I see it really differently. I see that pulling on the lead rope is just part of a greater pattern. So usually when the horse pulls on the lead rope, they're pulling on the lead rope to get the human's attention to something that they would like. They'd like to go over to the grass. They'd like to go closer to their friends. They would like to walk around when the human was standing still. So the horse actually pulls on the rope already when they feel like the human is not paying enough attention to their needs. So we have two choices there. If that's the pattern, we can either pull on the rope before the horse pulls on the rope so that we're drawing the horse's attention to our human's desires. So if I want to go left versus right, I can pull on the rope to draw the horse's attention in that direction. And I don't actually think there's anything wrong with pulling on the rope. I think the horses do it to us just about as often as we do it to them. Does the pattern make the relationship better? That's the question. Not do you pull on the rope or do you not pull on the rope? I think that the pressure is somewhat inconsequential, but the pattern recognition is the important part. When my horse pulls on the rope, does that make our relationship better? Is that something that I want to perpetuate? When I pull on the rope, does that make our relationship better? And a lot of people don't want to admit that, but it is very often true. If you pull on the rope at the right time, you will create a horse that is a lot happier to spend time with you. Timing is the key. Now, what about the option of not pulling on the rope? Do you have anything else you could do? You could try that. That's where pattern recognition comes in. If you talk to the horse, if you walk around the horse, if you jump up and down, if you pet them, if you scratch them, like you have a million different options. Try them. Okay, I'm not saying that one needs to pull on the rope or one needs to let the horse pull on the rope. But in a pattern, something else has to fill that gap. So if pulling on the rope is one of the things that exists in the patterns between you and your horse, you're going to have to find something to replace it. And then you're going to have to watch, did that work? Did that make our relationship better? That's the guideline right there. Now, that's not really what I teach, but it happens a lot around what I teach. And so it felt important to bring it up. What I teach is if there was no rope to pull on, what do we have left? If there was no rope for the horse to get our attention or for us to get their attention, what bonds us together? And then we practice all of those patterns. So hopefully when the rope goes on, pulling on each other is not part of our needed communication system. But if we don't have enough of better communication systems, that might be a fallback plan. And it's not a bad thing. It's not the end of the world to have a fallback plan that's a little pushing or a little pulling or pushing, depending on what the outcome is. Does that make us happier to spend time together? Now, hopefully, we're talking both the horse and the human here. We both want everyone in the relationship to be happy. But what I'm saying is it's all about patterns. What leads to what leads to what? And then the timing of creating new patterns. If I don't want to do pulling on the rope, what are my other options? And just standing there waiting for the horse to do the pulling on the rope isn't a great alternative. So we want to experiment with what our alternatives are in learning patterns. Some people are going to learn them really fast and come up with a new one to try. Other people are going to have to see a pattern a lot of times before they start thinking about what are the alternatives. It's going to be the same thing for your horses. Some horses are going to do the same pattern over and over and over again, even if they're unhappy with it, because it's a habit and it's known. How do you develop a horse that's willing to try a new pattern that might be better for both the human and the horse? That's what I teach. I like to teach it in freedom, but some people prefer to teach it with the halter on because they feel like they have more good options. Some people prefer to do mostly riding and think about their patterns in terms of sitting on the horse's back. I'm not opposed to any of those different types of training. I just teach the type of training that I like the best, which happens to be if the horse is free to move away from me, what causes them to want to stay with me? And for me, I want to make sure it's not food that's causing them to stay with me. It's their own internal feelings within their body when they live life in patterns with me. So when I touch them, do I know how long to touch them and when to stop? That's a pattern between us. When I move from the left side to the right side, do I know the way they prefer me to do it? very close, a little bit farther away, around the front, around the back. Then my favorite part, and this is something I've been teaching over the last few weeks, is that still true? So has the pattern changed since I learned this about my horse? And so this is something I've been teaching. I call it the 80-20 game, which is 20% of the time we test patterns. Is it still true, or have you changed? And so this is really, really fun to develop this learning about, when I touch my horse, do they still like it to be really brief, or would they like me to touch them for longer? How would I know? How do I read their eyes? How do I read their ears? If I can't read the subtle signs, they'll get more dramatic. That's how horses work. So don't worry. If you can't read the subtle indications, they're either going to push into you or pull away from you to let you know they don't like that pattern. I want to find as many patterns as possible that we like together. And that's what working in freedom is all about for me. If you then add a bridle or a halter or more dominant training, all of that's fine. It's just a different range of patterns that might include a little bit more pushing and pulling, because now you're tied to the horse. I like working where I'm not tied to the horse. I feel like I get to know them better, but everybody is different. I think the most important thing we need to remember is that we're all pattern learners, and some of us are slow pattern learners, some of us are quick pattern learners, but we are looking at the patterns we have and saying, does that pattern work for me? Or do I want to try a different pattern and see if that works for the relationship better? I think there was a comment back here. I'm going to scroll back and see if there's a question. Cindy just says, hello from Washington. Horses are masters at getting our attention, either pulling on the rope or slamming your knee into a tree because the rider's not paying attention to the trail while taking a picture. So this is actually a great comment, Cindy, because I find that a lot of the behaviors we don't like in our horses are our horse's way of getting us to pay more attention. Now, what if we don't want to pay more attention? What if we want to just take that picture on the trail and not get our knee slammed into a tree? That would be a situation where the horse needs to pay attention for us instead of asking us to pay more attention. So I was telling somebody about this just the other day. There's a really fun game that we used to do as kids where when we rode through trees, we would reach over to the tree and we'd push on it just until we made the horses lose balance a little bit. And the game was, how many trees could you push on? And then the horse started to recognize the pattern. And what they would do is they would try and avoid the trees. And it would become a habit that as kids, we would try and find a tree to push on to make our horses lose their balance. And the horses would really try and keep us out of reach of the trees. This meant as we picked up speed, or we were taking a picture, or we were not paying attention, the horse then had a habit of avoiding the trees, not going too close to the trees. So that's just pattern learning. The idea is that every pattern is a game, and the game is designed to get your partner to pay more attention. The attention could be on how much space is between the rider's knee and a tree. The attention could be on what does my horse or human want. The attention could be on what are the other horses in the herd doing. The idea is that our actions are a request for more attention to something. Is it working? Or do we need to choose a different action? Patterns are where the habit establishes. So when I do this, you do that. And then eventually you just do that because that's your habit now. So that example where I was talking about as a child, we'd go through the forest pushing on trees and seeing if we could get our horses to lose their balance a little bit and then find it again. This was ridiculously fun as a child. I'm not exactly sure why, but I remember it being very fun. And then watching the horses learn the pattern, adjust to the pattern, and avoid the pattern through their own actions. they chose to go carefully around trees and not get us close enough to them to push on. So hopefully that's a little practical story that'll help you understand pattern learning. And pattern learning, once repeated enough, becomes a pattern habit. A pattern habit starts to happen subconsciously. You don't have to think about it anymore. And a lot of horse training is just developing subconscious habits that work well for both the horse and the human. There's a million different ways you can do that. I'm teaching 2 more clinics in New Zealand over the next 2 weeks if you guys want to join me. I will then be home for a few weeks, finishing up 1 online course, getting ready to start the 2nd online course. And then I will be in Poland, the UK, and Indiana after that. So if anybody's interested, email me, elsa@tamingwild.com. I love this process of recognizing patterns, adapting patterns, changing patterns, and finding ways that your relationship can work better for everybody. So, yay, Julie, I hope to see you next week. I'm so glad. I'm looking forward to it too. I am going to say goodbye for now. I have a lovely little horse that is waiting for me, and I'm going to go play with pattern recognition, learning about him and his patterns, and I will look forward to seeing you guys all next week.